Welcome to The Adventure of the Unseen Arsenal, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Shadows of Empire, the unseen cases of Sherlock Holmes, playing in the year 1899. It is a strange sensation to see one's own letters and official reports, once sealed under the gravest classifications of the Foreign Office, now laid bare for public view. They chronicle a time when the British Empire stood at its zenith, yet was assailed by unseen forces. Holmes and I were drawn into cases that spanned continents, confronting secrets that could shake the very foundations of our power. These are the Shadows of Empire. Of these many complex affairs, I shall begin with a most peculiar and alarming case that threatened the very nerves of London itself. I have titled this account, The Adventure of the Unseen Arsenal. Chapter 1. The November fog, a perennial shroud on our great city, crept in with the dusk, pressing its grey face against our window panes at 221B Baker Street. Within, a cheerful fire crackled, its flickering light casting long dancing shadows across the scientific charts and chemical clutter that signified my friend's repose. For 2 days, Sherlock Holmes was sunk in a profound lethargy, a reaction as inevitable as the tide to his last case. I was setting aside my paper when our silence was broken, not by the jangling of the bell, but by a heavy, measured rap upon our door, a sound of such authority it seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. That will be Mycroft. Only he would use his cane in such a manner, a summons rather than a request, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Before I could question his deduction, the tread of Mrs. Hudson on the stairs was followed by the appearance of a figure who so completely filled the doorway that he seemed a part of the very architecture. Mycroft Holmes, his vast frame impeccably attired, regarded his younger brother with an expression of mild impatience. "Sherlock, I trust I am not interrupting anything of significance," remarked Mycroft Holmes. His voice was a low, resonant rumble, perfectly suited to the halls of government in which he moved. "On the contrary, you have rescued me from a state of terminal ennui. Pray, take a seat. What crisis of state is so dire that it compels you from the comfort of the Diogenes Club on such a wretched evening?" Sherlock Holmes said. Mycroft settled into the stoutest of our armchairs, which groaned under his considerable weight. He wasted no time on pleasantries. An incident of the gravest nature at the Central Telegraph Station. At 4 o'clock this afternoon, the main trunk line to Dover went dead. The cause, upon inspection, was a catastrophic failure in the primary repeater room, Mycroft Holmes said. An explosion? The work of Fenians, or perhaps the new breed of anarchist, declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's languor vanished, replaced by the familiar, keen-edged intensity that transformed his features. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with interest. "That is the confounding element. There was a concussion, certainly, powerful enough to twist solid steel relays into scrap metal. Yet the investigators from Scotland Yard are baffled. There is no trace of any known explosive, no residue, no scorch marks, not even the scent of powder. The damage is immense, but the cause is utterly invisible," responded Mycroft Holmes. A profound silence fell upon the room, broken only by the soft hiss of the gaslight and the whisper of the fire. An explosion with no explosive. The paradox hung in the air. No scorch marks, you say, and the metal is twisted, not shattered. Fascinating. You came here directly from the scene, Mycroft, yet your boots are remarkably clean, suggesting you did not venture into the debris yourself. This is not merely a police matter, it is a matter for government, declared Sherlock Holmes. Precisely. The Empire's ability to communicate with the continent has been compromised by a silent, traceless force. It is a threat of an entirely new order. The Diogenes Club, on behalf of Her Majesty's government, formally requests your assistance. You must discover the source of this unseen arsenal before it can be deployed again, said Mycroft Holmes. Mycroft rose, his statement delivered with the finality of a royal decree. He gave a curt nod, and, a moment later, the sound of his heavy footsteps descended the stairs, followed by the firm click of the front door closing against the fog. "Well, Watson, the game is afoot once more," deduced Sherlock Holmes. He was already on his feet, his mind alight, pacing before the mantelpiece with a restless energy that filled our small sitting-room. "But where do we begin, Holmes? There is no evidence, no clue to follow," commented Dr. John Watson. He replied sharply, his voice cutting through my uncertainty. "The absence of evidence is in itself a clue of the first order. The police have looked, but they have not seen. In the morning, Watson, we shall travel to the telegraph station and apply our eyes to what they have so clearly missed," stated Sherlock Holmes. The hansom cab deposited us before a cordon of constables in a narrow city street, the air thick with a peculiar acrid scent akin to a lightning strike. Before us stood the skeletal remains of the Central Telegraph Exchange, its facade blackened not by soot, but by a strange, iridescent discoloration. A profound silence hung over the place, a stark contrast to the usual clatter of commerce, broken only by the crunch of our boots on shattered pavement and the low murmur of official voices within. "Ah, Holmes, I thought your brother's summons would bring you. A nasty bit of business, this. Anarchists, I'll wager. A new type of bomb, perhaps." Inspector Lestrade answered. Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard emerged from the ruined doorway, his face grim. He gestured us inside, into a scene of organized chaos. Wires, thick as a man's thumb, drooped from the ceiling like dead serpents. Great brass terminals were not so much blown apart as they were warped, twisted into grotesque shapes, as if the very metal had been made molten for an instant and then frozen anew. Yet I saw no evidence of a conventional blast, no crater, no shrapnel, and most curiously, no soot. "A bomb that leaves no residue, Lestrade? One that melts brass but does not scorch the surrounding wood," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's voice was sharp, cutting through the inspector's assumptions. "Your anarchists have become remarkably tidy," replied Sherlock Holmes. Lestrade grumbled, kicking at a loose floorboard. "Well, what else could it be? We have found nothing. No device, no fuse, not so much as a scrap of paper," replied Inspector Lestrade. Holmes paid him no further mind. His eyes, alight with that familiar, intense fire, scanned every inch of the room. He moved with a swift, predatory grace, ignoring the larger devastation, to focus upon the minutiae the police had so clearly overlooked. He produced his powerful pocket lens, dropping to one knee beside a particularly distorted slab of copper switching gear. The only sound was the faint scrape of his cuff against the metal. "Have you found something, Holmes?" commented Dr. John Watson. He did not reply at once. Instead, he gestured for me to come closer. As I knelt beside him, I saw what had captured his attention. A fine, crystalline powder sprinkled across the warped copper, almost invisible to the naked eye. It caught the dim light filtering through the broken windows, shimmering with a faint, silvery blue luminescence, like frost on a winter's morning. He spoke in a low, almost reverent tone. "Scotland Yard searches for the remnants of an explosion, Watson. They are looking for what is missing. I, however, prefer to look for what has been added," remarked Sherlock Holmes. With the utmost care, he produced a small glass phial from his waistcoat pocket and, using a pair of fine tweezers, began to collect a sample of the glistening filaments. Each particle seemed to cling to the metal with a strange tenacity. "What is that, Holmes? Dust? You cannot mean to build a case upon a bit of dust," answered Inspector Lestrade. Holmes rose to his feet, capping the phial with a decisive click. His eyes held a distant, calculating gleam as he replied, his voice cool. "On the contrary, Lestrade, I suspect this is not dust at all. I suspect it is the weapon itself, or rather, its ghost," Sherlock Holmes noted. Without another word, he turned and strode from the building, leaving the inspector staring after him in open-mouthed bafflement. As our carriage rattled back towards Baker Street, Holmes remained utterly silent, turning the phial over and over in his long, nimble fingers. The faint glimmer within seemed to hold a terrible and unknown promise, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp London air. Upon our return to Baker Street, the familiar, comforting chaos of our lodgings did little to dispel the profound unease that had settled upon me. Holmes, however, seemed energized by the puzzle. He wasted no time, casting off his coat and descending upon his chemistry corner with the focused intensity of a hawk. For hours, the only sounds were the hiss of the Bunsen burner, the clinking of glass vials, and the low, almost imperceptible hum of a new electrical apparatus. A faint scent of ozone hung in the air, sharp and unnatural against the familiar pipe smoke. I watched him from my armchair, my book lying forgotten in my lap. He would peer intently into his microscope, then scribble a furious volley of notes before turning to a retort bubbling with some vile-smelling concoction. At one point, he introduced a tiny sample of the shimmering dust to an electrical current. A brilliant, silent flash of violet light illuminated his lean features, and the hum from his machine rose to a disconcerting whine before abruptly ceasing. The silence that followed was somehow more menacing than the noise it replaced. "For heaven's sake, Holmes, what is it you have found? You have been at it since luncheon," remarked Dr. John Watson. He did not look up from the slide he was preparing, his long fingers moving with unnerving precision. "Patience, Watson. One cannot rush a conversation with the elements. They are reticent conversationalists, but they do not lie. These filaments, they are quite the talkers," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Another hour crawled by. The London fog pressed thick against our window panes, muffling the city's traffic to a distant, rhythmic groan. Finally, Holmes straightened up, his back cracking audibly in the quiet room. He turned, and in the gaslight I saw an expression I had seldom seen, profound triumph mingled with the deepest gravity. "It is as I suspected, and yet far worse than I had imagined," stated Sherlock Holmes. "What is? The dust?" commented Dr. John Watson. "It is not dust, my dear fellow. It is the ghost of a conductor, an alloy quite unknown to me of tungsten, silver, and something else, something that crystallizes under immense energetic stress. These filaments are not the cause of the destruction, they are the consequence. They are the shattered remnants of a pathway," replied Sherlock Holmes. He paced before the hearth, his hands clasped behind him. The excitement of the chase was now tempered by a chilling seriousness. "A pathway for what, Holmes?" commented Dr. John Watson. He stopped and fixed me with his piercing grey eyes. His voice, when he spoke, was low and resonant, devoid of its usual theatricality. "Energy, Watson. Pure, directed energy. Think of it. No explosive residue, no shrapnel, merely warped metal and these crystalline ashes. The telegraph cable was not blown apart. It was vibrated into disintegration. We are not dealing with anarchists and dynamite. We face an intellect who has weaponized a principle of physics the world does not yet know exists. This is not a bomb. It is a resonant wave, a silent, invisible thunderbolt delivered from a distance," Sherlock Holmes said. A cold dread crept up my spine. The implications of his words were staggering, tearing at the very fabric of the world I knew. A weapon with no sound, no projectile, against which there was no conceivable defense. Holmes saw the look on my face and gave a curt nod. "Precisely. The game has changed, Watson. We are no longer hunting a man, but a mind of the first order. And to comprehend his methods, I shall require expertise of a very particular sort," stated Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's grim conclusion, delivered with such finality in our Baker Street rooms, had cast a pall over the morning. The revelation of an invisible energy, a force capable of such precise destruction, felt less like science and more like a nightmare made real. It was therefore with a palpable sense of disquiet that we found ourselves summoned by telegram to that strangest of London institutions, the Diogenes Club. Within its hallowed halls, where silence was the single, inviolable rule, we were ushered into a private chamber. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and beeswax, and the only sound was the solemn ticking of a grand long-case clock in the corner, measuring out a future that felt increasingly finite. Mycroft Holmes was already there, a great immobile mountain of a man, seemingly fused with the vast armchair in which he slumped. He did not rise, but acknowledged us with a slight inclination of his head, his eyes heavy-lidded, but missing nothing. His voice was a low, almost wary rumble, the sound of immense intellect burdened by immense responsibility. "Sherlock, Doctor, the situation has assumed a graver aspect. The destruction of the Woolwich telegraphic relay this morning gives substance to our fears. The enemy is testing the range and power of his device," Mycroft Holmes replied. "It is no longer a test, Mycroft. It is a systematic dismantling of the Empire's nervous system," Holmes replied, his tone a blade stripped of all social ceremony. "You have something for me," explained Sherlock Holmes. Mycroft sighed, a slow exhalation of air, and from an inner pocket produced a folded sheet of official stationery. The crisp rustle of the paper seemed an outrage in the profound quiet of the room. "A list," he stated simply, "compiled by my best men. It contains the names of every physicist in the British Isles whose theoretical work touches upon resonant frequencies or wireless power transmission. There are but a handful," said Mycroft Holmes. Holmes took the paper, and his eyes devoured the page with a predatory swiftness. A flicker of dismissal crossed his features as he read each name, his thin lips compressed into a line of dismissal. Then he stopped, his finger resting upon a single entry. "Marconi is a showman. Lodge is a public figure. Tesla is across the Atlantic. These men operate in the light," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "But this one, Professor Alistair Finch, formerly of Cambridge, now in private research, a recluse, published nothing of note in 5 years. He is our man," explained Sherlock Holmes. "A logical deduction, but one without proof. Finch has no known political affiliations. He is a pure theorist," Mycroft Holmes said. "Precisely. That is what makes him so perfect," Holmes countered, a feverish light in his eyes. "Our saboteur requires a brilliant, isolated mind, a man so consumed by the beauty of his theory that he fails to see the monstrous application. Finch provides the engine, but another man holds the tiller." "Who is he, Mycroft?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A shadow of profound gravity settled upon Mycroft's features. He seemed to weigh his next words as if they were matters of state. "There is another matter, a disquieting coincidence. We have a new cultural attaché at the German embassy, a Herr Victor Kraus. His diplomatic record is unremarkable, but his academic history is in advanced electrical engineering. He has been observed on 3 separate occasions sketching the architecture near the sites of these incidents, always a day or 2 before they occur," Mycroft Holmes answered. Holmes stood perfectly still, the memorandum hanging limply from his hand. The 2 names, Finch, the reclusive genius, and Kraus, the observant attaché, seemed to hang in the air between us, the 2 poles of a terrifying new battery. I could almost hear the intricate machinery of his mind whirring, fitting the disparate pieces together. "A reclusive academic and a charming diplomat," he said softly, a quiet intensity in his voice that was more menacing than any shout. "One cannot simply knock at the door of either. A direct approach would be a fool's errand. This requires a subtler touch, Watson. We need an agent who can navigate the drawing rooms and scientific societies where such men might intersect. We require a lady's discretion." Mycroft's grave warnings concerning the German attaché, Herr Victor Kraus, lingered in the very air of the hansom cab rattling us towards the grand terraces of Mayfair. The oppressive fog of Baker Street gave way to a crisp, cold afternoon, and the muffled sounds of the city took on a sharper, more refined character. The clatter of our horses' hooves echoed from immaculate stone facades as we drew to a halt before a residence of quiet but undeniable elegance. A moment later, a butler showed us into a drawing-room where London's frantic energy felt a world away. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, its cheerful sound a counterpoint to the steady, solemn tick of a French mantel clock. The air was warm and scented with dried lavender. Lady Beatrice Foxglove rose to greet us, the rustle of her silk gown a whisper in the tranquil room. "Mr. Holmes, Doctor, an unexpected pleasure. To what do I owe this visit? I trust London has not run out of criminals for you to pursue," replied Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Her voice was as poised and clear as the crystal on her mantelpiece, with a current of amusement running just beneath the surface. "On the contrary, Lady Beatrice, it has produced one of such a novel character that my usual methods are proving insufficient. I have come to you not for your knowledge of the criminal world, but of a far more dangerous one, society," replied Sherlock Holmes. He took the seat she offered, his lean frame perched on the velvet cushion's edge, his eyes already scanning every detail of the room. "You flatter me, Mr. Holmes. Pray, continue," responded Lady Beatrice Foxglove. "I require information. There are two men whose spheres of influence are so vastly different that they ought never to intersect, and yet I have a growing conviction that they have. The first is a Professor Alistair Finch, a man of science said to be a recluse. The second is a man of diplomacy, Herr Victor Kraus of the German Embassy." Sherlock Holmes responded. At the mention of the second name, I saw Lady Beatrice's posture straighten almost imperceptibly. "Professor Finch is a ghost. He publishes his articles, but is never seen. Herr Kraus, however, he is altogether too visible. A charming man, with a keen interest in all things British, particularly our engineering. He is a fixture at every diplomatic soiree. What is your interest in this unlikely pair?" Lady Beatrice Foxglove answered. "My interest is in any communication, any shared acquaintance, any rumour, no matter how trivial, that might connect the laboratory to the embassy. I need to know if the scientist's genius has been remarked upon by the diplomat's masters," explained Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's gaze settled upon a small, ornate box on a side table. Leaning forward, his expression became one of intense concentration. "This music box, for instance, a beautiful piece. The silver work is Russian, but the mechanical movement, I would wager, is German. The precision of the gearwork is unmistakable. A gift, perhaps, from an admirer who appreciates complex machinery." Lady Beatrice's faint smile conveyed genuine appreciation for his craft. She replied, her tone now holding a new note of gravity. "You see everything, Mr. Holmes. Herr Kraus prides himself on his eye for such things. Your point is taken. A man's hobbies can often reveal his true occupation. Very well. I am to attend a function at the German Embassy tomorrow evening. I shall become a most attentive listener," answered Lady Beatrice Foxglove. "You are an invaluable ally. The whispers in a ballroom can be more revealing than a shouted confession in a police station," Sherlock Holmes noted. Our business concluded, we soon took our leave. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind us, and we stepped once more into the brisk London air. As we settled back into our cab, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse's hooves beginning its journey back to the familiar grime of our own quarter, Holmes fell silent, lost in thought. "Lady Beatrice will canvass the drawing-rooms, Watson, an excellent campaign. But we cannot afford to wait for diplomatic rumour. While she observes the courtier, we must call upon the hermit," stated Sherlock Holmes. "To Professor Finch's home?" commented Dr. John Watson. "Precisely. It is time we saw for ourselves the laboratory of the man who may be designing the Empire's doom without ever leaving his study. To Kensington, Watson, Sherlock Holmes said. Our hansom cab drew to a halt before a tall, narrow house in a quiet Kensington side street, a residence as unassuming as its occupant. There was nothing to distinguish it from its neighbours save for a faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to emanate from the very brickwork. As we ascended the steps, the sound grew more persistent, a low thrumming that spoke of arcane energies at work within. A sharp rap of the knocker brought shuffling footsteps, and the door was opened by a man who seemed the very picture of academic distraction. Professor Alistair Finch was a slight, bird-like man, with spectacles perched precariously on his nose and a smudge of graphite upon his cheek. He blinked at us, his eyes struggling to adjust from the gloom of his study to the grey afternoon light. His voice was thin and reedy. "Yes, can I be of some assistance?" Professor Alistair Finch replied. "Professor Finch, I believe. My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. We have come to consult you on a matter of the utmost importance concerning resonant harmonics." The professor's face lit up with an almost boyish enthusiasm. He ushered us inside, through a hallway piled high with books and journals, and into a laboratory that consumed the entire rear of the house. The air within was thick with the sharp, clean scent of ozone, and the low hum we had heard outside was now a constant, resonant drone. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting brass-bound instruments and glass tubes that glowed with a faint violet light. It was the sanctum of a man utterly devoted to his work. He gestured wildly at a complex apparatus of coils and vacuum bulbs. "My life's work, the wireless transmission of power. Imagine, Mr. Holmes, a world without cables, where energy flows through the very ether," remarked Professor Alistair Finch. "A remarkable achievement, Professor. Such work must attract a great deal of attention. Have you collaborated with others in your field?" stated Sherlock Holmes. A look of immense pride crossed Finch's features. He scurried to a desk overflowing with papers and returned with a sheaf of letters. "Not directly, no. But for the past year I have had a most stimulating correspondence with a Dr. Schiller in Berlin, a first-rate mind. He grasped the theoretical implications at once. It was he who posed the final critical problems, matters of focal precision and energy amplification that allowed me to perfect the system. He saw them as mere intellectual puzzles, you understand, but in solving them I unlocked everything," replied Professor Alistair Finch. Holmes took the letters, his eyes scanning the pages with unnerving speed. I watched his expression harden, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly, before he turned his attention from the papers to the humming machine, his gaze lingering on a particular set of finely wound copper coils. When he finally spoke, Holmes's voice had lost its earlier warmth, now sharp and cold as steel. "Professor, you are a master of theoretical physics. Of that there is no doubt. But tell me, why would a purely academic model require a resonant amplifier tuned with such military precision?" remarked Sherlock Holmes. I beg your pardon? It is for efficiency, to solve Schiller's problem," replied Professor Alistair Finch. "No, sir," Holmes countered, his voice cutting through the laboratory's hum. "This is not the work of a theorist. The specific shielding on this vacuum tube, the calibration of this capacitor bank,
These are the practical applications of an engineer intent on creating a focused, destructive beam. Your Dr. Schiller did not flatter you into solving a puzzle. He guided your brilliant mind, step by step, into building him a weapon, Sherlock Holmes noted.
The colour drained from Professor Finch's face. The letters slipped from his trembling fingers, scattering across the dusty floorboards. The constant, optimistic hum of his great machine suddenly became a most sinister drone. His voice was a mere whisper. A weapon? But the science, it was for the betterment of mankind, Professor Alistair Finch answered. We left him there, a man whose world had been shattered in a single sentence. As our cab rattled away through the darkening streets, Holmes sat in grim silence, his brow furrowed in thought. The clatter of the horses' hooves on the cobblestones was the only sound for a long while. The poor man was merely a tool, Watson. His genius turned against the very nation he serves. We have found the forge where the weapon was made. Now we must have irrefutable proof of the smith's identity. I now await word from Lady Beatrice with the greatest impatience. Fog descended upon Regent's Park like a shroud, muffling the distant rumble of carriage wheels and reducing the world to a small grey circle. Water dripped with mournful persistence from the bare branches of the plane trees. Our own feet crunching on the damp gravel, an unwelcome intrusion into the profound quiet. Holmes had selected this clandestine spot for its very anonymity, a place where faces blurred into vapour, and the thick, clinging air swallowed every voice. The fog suits our purpose, Watson. It is a natural cloak for secrets, replied Sherlock Holmes. He stood with his collar turned up, his hawk-like features sharpened by the cold, and fixed his gaze upon the path. I knew we were not merely waiting, but observing. Presently a figure emerged from the shifting vapour, a mere silhouette at first, which then resolved into the elegant form of Lady Beatrice Foxglove. She moved with a quick, determined step, her face pale and etched with concern. Mr. Holmes, I came as quickly as I could. What I have learned is most disquieting, answered Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Her voice dropped to a low, urgent murmur, devoid of its usual society lightness. She clutched a small reticule in her gloved hands, as if the bag itself contained the very weight of her discovery. Pray tell us, Lady Beatrice, we are entirely at your disposal, declared Sherlock Holmes. The German academic Professor Finch spoke of does not exist. The correspondence was conducted under a pseudonym, a Dr. Schiller. My contacts at the embassy, however, were able to cross-reference the paper stock and the particular turns of phrase. The letters originated with none other than the cultural attaché, Herr Victor Kraus, remarked Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Holmes gave a curt nod, as if merely confirming a half-formed theory. I, however, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. So Finch was not collaborating, but being expertly mined for his knowledge, wondered Dr. John Watson. Precisely. Kraus played upon the professor's vanity, praising his theoretical genius while steering their discussions towards very practical matters. He presented the two greatest obstacles as intellectual puzzles for Finch to solve: how to create a portable power source for the apparatus, and, more critically, how to tune the frequency with absolute precision to a specific target. Lady Beatrice Foxglove answered. The missing link clicked into place. Finch had provided the theoretical key, and Krauss, the engineer, had turned it in the lock with chilling precision. In the gloom, I saw Holmes's eyes glitter with a sharp, cold light. Flattery as a tool of espionage, it is as old as Delilah, and just as effective. You have done excellent work, Lady Beatrice. Is there more? Sherlock Holmes noted. She hesitated, her gaze darting into the swirling fog as if she feared being overheard even here. Her voice trembled slightly as she delivered her final, most alarming piece of news. There is. For the past 2 weeks, on 3 separate occasions, Herr Krauss has been observed in Greenwich. He was not admiring the view from the park. He was making detailed sketches of the Royal Observatory, answered Lady Beatrice Foxglove. A profound silence fell between us, broken only by the distant, mournful clang of a ship's bell from the river. The Royal Observatory, the very heart of global timekeeping, the nerve centre from which the Empire's clocks were set. Holmes drew a sharp breath, and when he spoke, his voice held a new and terrible gravity. This is no longer merely about destroying cables, Watson. This is about precision. It is about timing. Our adversary is not just aiming at the body of the Empire, but at its very pulse, Sherlock Holmes noted. The information from Lady Beatrice had left a chill in our Baker Street rooms that no fire could dispel. The image of Herr Krauss sketching the Royal Observatory at Greenwich lingered between us, a solitary clue in a vast, unseen puzzle, its significance eluding us. Holmes had retreated into one of his profound silences, fingers steepled, his gaze lost in the firelight. The morning papers lay untouched, the city's familiar rumble a distant drumbeat. It was a stillness pregnant with violence. The sharp cry of a newsboy from the street, followed by the frantic pounding of our page's feet on the stairs, served as the overture to disaster. The boy burst in, brandishing a special edition, his words tumbling out in a breathless rush. "Another attack! Far worse, sir! A true catastrophe for the Empire!" Holmes snatched the paper, his lethargy shed like a cloak. His grey, hawk-like eyes devoured the columns. I read over his shoulder, my own heart sinking with every word. The main underwater telegraphic cable at Dover, the primary nerve connecting Britain to the continent, had been severed. Not frayed, not damaged, but utterly obliterated at a key coastal node, plunging our communications into disarray. The report spoke of a strange, localized disturbance in the water, a flash of heat without sound, and then silence. 2 attacks, Watson. 2 impossibly precise strikes. This is not the work of an anarchist with a pocketful of dynamite. This is the work of a mathematician, deduced Sherlock Holmes. A mathematician? But how can you possibly deduce that? The paper says there is no evidence, no trace of a device, responded Dr. John Watson. That is the evidence, he replied, rising and seizing his coat. Come, Watson, the air of this room is thick with unanswered questions. We shall walk by the river. I find the flow of water often stimulates the flow of thought, Sherlock Holmes noted. We found ourselves soon upon the embankment, the Thames a sluggish, grey serpent beside us. The mournful hoot of a tugboat echoed through the damp air, and the scent of coal smoke and river mud was thick in our nostrils. Holmes walked with his head bowed, his pace brisk, oblivious to the anxious faces of the Londoners we passed. He was wrestling with a problem of immense proportions, and I knew better than to interrupt. He stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed eastward, down river in the direction of Greenwich. The clouds had parted slightly, and a pale winter sun glinted off the water. For a long moment he stood perfectly still, a statue of pure concentration amidst the city's ceaseless motion. He turned to me, his eyes alight with a terrifying fire of comprehension. "The timing, Watson! I have been a fool to focus only on the location. It is the timing that matters," Sherlock Holmes responded. "The timing? What of it? The first attack was just after 10 in the morning, and this one—" I trailed off, my own mind making the connection. "Good heavens, Holmes, this one was at 10 o'clock precisely," responded Dr. John Watson. "Precisely," he echoed, his voice sharp as cracking ice. "Not random acts of terror, but coordinated strikes. How does one coordinate a silent, invisible weapon across miles of city and sea? One requires a signal, a common, reliable, and utterly impeachable signal that reaches all points simultaneously," Sherlock Holmes responded. He tapped his temple with a long forefinger, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a clarity that only he could yet perceive. Back in our rooms, with the gloom of evening drawing in and the gaslight hissing softly, he finally gave voice to the dreadful conclusion that had formed on the banks of the Thames. He spoke with a chilling certainty. "Our saboteur is not merely a scientist, Watson, nor is he simply an agent of a foreign power. He is an artist of chaos, and he has found the perfect conductor for his orchestra of destruction. Why was Krauss sketching the Royal Observatory? Because it is the heart of our empire's time. Every day at 10 o'clock, the Greenwich time signal is sent out. It is the metronome by which the nation sets its clocks, and by which our enemy triggers his weapon," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. "The fire in our hearth at Baker Street did little to dispel the chill that had settled upon me. Outside, the low rumble of a late-night hansom cab rattled the window-panes, but within our rooms the only sound was the restless tread of my companion. Holmes paced before the mantelpiece, a caged tiger in his worn dressing-gown, his brow furrowed in a storm of concentration. The news of the severed underwater cable had confirmed his suspicions, yet he had remained silent for the better part of an hour, his mind working at a furious pace I could only guess at. At last he stopped dead in the centre of the room. His grey eyes burned with a feverish light. "Watson, it is a principle of resonant sympathy. The entire affair hinges upon it," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "Resonant sympathy? Holmes, I confess I do not follow," Dr. John Watson said. He gestured impatiently towards the 2 crystal wine glasses on the side table. "Imagine one of these glasses is our target, a telegraph pole, a cable junction. Now, imagine I strike a tuning fork of a precise pitch. Only the glass which is tuned to that same pitch will vibrate, will it not? It will shudder, and if the vibration is strong enough, it will shatter. The other glass remains untouched," replied Sherlock Holmes. I watched him, my mind beginning to grasp the edges of his terrifying theory. The rhythmic creak of the floorboards under his feet seemed to count out the seconds of our nation's peril. "Then you are saying there is no explosive?" Dr. John Watson commented. "None in the conventional sense. That has been the genius of their misdirection. The shimmering dust we found is not the charge, but the tuning fork itself, a catalyst painted upon the target. It does nothing on its own. It merely waits to be excited," observed Sherlock Holmes. He began pacing again, his voice dropping to a low, intense pitch that held me utterly captivated. "Our unseen enemy has constructed a transmitter, a device of immense power, somewhere in London, broadcasting a wave of energy across the city. A wave that is harmless to everything except that which has been prepared with a catalyst. Only the painted targets resonate. Only they are torn asunder from within by an invisible force," Sherlock Holmes noted. A profound horror washed over me. This was not warfare as I had ever known it. It was a ghost, a plague of physics unleashed upon the arteries of the Empire. The sheer diabolical ingenuity of it was staggering. But the timing, Holmes, you said the attacks were synchronized. How could they trigger it with such precision? Dr. John Watson commented. He fixed me with a grim smile, his theory now complete, a perfect and terrible edifice of logic. "For that, my dear Watson, they use the most reliable and precise clock in the entire world. They have harnessed the very heartbeat of the Empire to use against itself. The energy wave is broadcast continuously. Yet the catalyst is designed to become violently unstable only upon receiving a final, specific pulse," deduced Sherlock Holmes. He paused, letting the weight of his final words settle in the silent room, where the only sound was now the soft hiss of the gas lamp. "That final activating pulse, my friend, is the 6-pip signal broadcast daily from the Royal Observatory, the Greenwich time signal," explained Sherlock Holmes. The weight of Holmes's final words concerning the Greenwich time signal seemed to press the very air from our rooms at Baker Street. The cheerful crackle of the fire had become a menacing whisper, and the familiar ticking of the mantel clock now sounded like a countdown to some unimaginable catastrophe. I stared into the flames, my mind struggling to grasp the scale of a weapon that could strike from nowhere, triggered by the simple, reliable pulse of time itself. "The method is now clear, Watson, but the method is merely a tool. We must give the tool a hand, and the hand a name," declared Sherlock Holmes. His voice, cutting through the heavy silence, was as crisp and cold as the winter air outside. He had risen and was now pacing before the hearth, his long fingers steepled before him. "But where could we possibly begin? There has been no communication, no demand, no trace of any soul at the sites of these detonations," Dr. John Watson said. "We begin with the necessary qualities. Who in this great city possesses a mastery of Hertzian waves and resonant frequencies far beyond the grasp of even our own Marconi? Who moves within circles that would grant him access to the schematics of our infrastructure? And who, most critically, serves a power that would benefit most from the paralysis of the British Empire?" explained Sherlock Holmes. He paused his pacing and plucked a calling card from the clutter on the mantelpiece, holding it between two fingers as if it were a fragile specimen. Our charming cultural attaché, Herr Victor Krause, a background in advanced electrical engineering at Heidelberg, conveniently omitted from his diplomatic dossier. an unnerving habit of appearing at scientific soirees. When he called upon us, I noted the faintest scent of ozone about his person, a smell I mistook for a peculiar continental perfume. It was, I now see, the lingering aroma of high-voltage experimentation. Before I could respond to this startling accusation, a heavy and familiar tread sounded upon our stair, a tread that announced business of the highest importance. The door swung open to admit the imposing figure of Mycroft Holmes. "Sherlock, I trust your puzzle is nearing its solution. The cabinet grows restive," Mycroft Holmes said. His voice was a low, sonorous hum, betraying none of the panic that I felt must surely be gripping the highest echelons of government. "The puzzle is solved, Mycroft. The man is Kraus. All that remains is his final, most devastating move," Sherlock Holmes said. "And that is?" replied Mycroft Holmes. "He has severed the arteries. Now he will strike at the heart, the central telegraph exchange. It is the only target remaining that would render the entire network, and by extension the empire, deaf and dumb in a single instant," deduced Sherlock Holmes. Mycroft's impassive face seemed for a fraction of a second to tighten. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, the pragmatist absorbing the theorist's conclusion. My thoughts were inclining in the same direction. I have already spoken with the Yard. Inspector Lestrade and a contingent of his ablest men are held in readiness, awaiting our instruction, answered Mycroft Holmes. "Excellent. But this is not a matter of batons and whistles. This is a hunt. Watson, your coat. Fetch your service revolver. We shall need to be swifter than the electric current itself if we are to prevent London from being plunged into an age of silence," Sherlock Holmes noted. His energy was infectious, a sudden storm breaking the oppressive calm. As I moved to obey, the sound of the front door opening below carried up to us, admitting a sudden gust of wind that moaned in the flue, carrying with it the damp, urgent scent of the fog-bound city we were about to race across. Our hansom cab skidded to a halt on the sleek cobblestones of a narrow street just off Cheapside. The air was thick with the damp chill of a November evening. It carried the scent of wet coal and the distant mournful cry of a foghorn from the Thames. Inspector Lestrade waited for us in the mouth of a darkened alley. He was a bulldog of a man, wrapped in a heavy coat, his features lit intermittently by the flickering gaslight. From the shadows behind him, the quiet clink of metal and the shuffling of heavy boots confirmed his men were already in position. His voice was a low growl, barely disturbing the quiet. "Holmes, I hope for your sake this isn't another of your wild goose chases. My men are spread thin as it is," Inspector Lestrade said. Holmes stepped from the cab, his tall, spare figure a silhouette against the gloom. "The only goose, Inspector, is the one about to have its golden eggs smashed. Herr Kraus is here. He requires a clear line of sight to the telegraph exchange, elevation, and a structure substantial enough to mask the resonance of his device. There is only one such location that serves his purpose," deduced Sherlock Holmes. Without another word, Holmes plunged into the labyrinth of byways that formed the secret circulatory system of the city. I had traversed London with him countless times, yet I was always astonished by his intimate knowledge of its hidden arteries. We moved swiftly, our footsteps echoing in the tight passages, past the darkened windows of counting-houses and the iron-grated doors of vaults. Lestrade and 2 of his constables struggled to keep pace, their heavy tread a stark contrast to Holmes's near-silent progress. I broke the silence, my breath pluming in the cold air. "Where are we going, Holmes? Surely a main thoroughfare would be faster," Dr. John Watson commented. He replied without breaking stride, his voice sharp and low. "Krauss is no fool, Watson. He would anticipate an approach from the open. He will be watching the grand avenues, but he will not be watching the city's guts. It is from here we shall see him without being seen," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He stopped abruptly, pressing us back into a recessed doorway. The air here was thick with the smell of damp stone and decay. From our hiding place we had a perfect, framed view of a small square. The far side was dominated by the soot-blackened spire of St. Swithin's. Its clock tower loomed against a sky the colour of slate. A single bell tolled the half-hour, the sound seeming to vibrate in my very bones. He raised his field-glasses to his eyes and murmured, "There, the belfry, the ideal position, high enough to clear the surrounding rooftops, and the clockwork mechanism would provide the perfect cover for the hum of his own machine," deduced Sherlock Holmes. I followed his gaze, my heart hammering against my ribs. The clock face was dark, but high above it, within the arched opening of the belfry, I thought I saw a flicker of movement. Holmes held the glasses steady for a long moment, his knuckles white. The scrape of Lestrade's boot on the flagstones beside me sounded as loud as a gunshot in the oppressive silence. He lowered the glasses, his eyes glinting with a cold fire. "I see it. A glint of polished brass that does not belong amongst bells and gears. He is there. He is making his final adjustments," stated Sherlock Holmes. The inspector hissed, reaching for his whistle. "Then we have him," said Inspector Lestrade. Holmes's hand shot out and gripped Lestrade's wrist. "No, a signal would be his cue to act. We must take him before he can complete the circuit. Watson, you are with me. Inspector, you and your men will secure the base of the tower. Move now, and for God's sake, be silent," declared Sherlock Holmes. As Lestrade and his men melted back into the shadows, Holmes and I stepped out into the square. The tower stood before us, a silent, menacing giant. Somewhere in its stony heart, a man was preparing to sever the nerves of an empire, and we were the only 2 souls climbing into the darkness to stop him. The final ascent was a dizzying spiral of worn stone steps, the air thick with the scent of cooled iron and lubricating oil. Above us, a monstrous rhythmic ticking grew from a distant heartbeat into an oppressive, deafening thunder that seemed to shake the very marrow in my bones. Each metallic clank and groan of the vast clockwork mechanism echoed the frantic pounding in my own chest. We were close. Holmes pushed open a heavy oak door, and we stepped into the belfry. Silhouetted against a grimy arched window stood Herr Victor Krauss, framed by the pale moonlight as he made a final adjustment to a complex apparatus of brass coils and shimmering glass tubes that hummed with a low, latent power. The city of London sprawled below, a sea of gaslight and shadow, utterly oblivious to the silent threat perched above it. His voice cut through the mechanical din, sharp and clear. "Your interest in horology is a surprise, Herr Kraus, though I suspect your device is intended to stop more than the mere passage of time," observed Sherlock Holmes. The German attaché spun around. There was no fear in his eyes, only a blaze of cold, defiant fury. A bitter wind whistled through a broken pane of glass, carrying with it the distant rumble of the metropolis. A sneer twisted his lips. "Holmes, I should have known they would send their prize bloodhound. You see the magnificent effect, but you could never comprehend the cause," replied Herr Victor Kraus. "On the contrary, I comprehend it perfectly. The precise resonance frequency required to shatter carbonized filaments within telegraphic relays. It is the work of a master electrical engineer, or perhaps a family of them. One whose firm, specializing in colonial infrastructure, was systematically ruined by the predatory expansion of the British Imperial Cable Company," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Kraus's composure fractured. The accusation, delivered with such surgical precision, hung in the air between us, more potent than any weapon. At that moment, the great gears above us engaged with a deafening, grinding shriek of metal on metal, as if the tower itself were crying out. His voice rose to a desperate shout to be heard over the noise. "You call it expansion. I call it warfare. An unseen arsenal of ledgers and tariffs that strangles a business more surely than any army. My father was destroyed by your economic savagery. His name, his life's work, erased. Tonight I sever the nerves of your precious empire with an arsenal of my own," Herr Victor Kraus replied. With a guttural cry, he lunged not for us, but for a large copper switch upon his infernal machine. My old service instincts, long dormant, surged to the fore. I did not hesitate. I threw myself forward, my shoulder striking Kraus in the chest. We crashed against the heavy oak frame of the clockwork, the impact sending a shudder through the floorboards. He was wiry and possessed a fanatic strength, his fingers clawing for the switch. His German curses were lost in the rhythmic, thunderous slam of the escapement anchor, which swung like a giant's hammer beside our heads. My service revolver, drawn upon entering, was useless in such a desperate grapple. Gripping it by the barrel, I brought the heavy butt of the weapon down upon his outstretched wrist with all the force I could muster. A sickening crack echoed, followed by a sharp cry of pain. His hand fell limp. The struggle was over. Kraus lay gasping on the dusty floor, his plot undone. Holmes stepped past me, his face a grim mask in the moonlight. He paid no heed to the vanquished spy. His gaze fixed instead upon the silent, intricate machine that hummed with the promise of silent ruin. The only sounds now were the colossal, steady ticking of the great clock and Kraus's ragged breathing. His voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it seemed to fill the sudden quiet. The genius to conceive it, Watson, and the hatred to unleash it. We have stopped the man, but the idea is now loose in the world, deduced Sherlock Holmes. I looked from the defeated man to the formidable engine he had built, and a cold dread settled deep within me. The night's work was done, but I knew with a terrible certainty that the reckoning was yet to come. The profound silence of the Diogenes Club was a world away from the clamour and violence of the clock tower. Here, in a private chamber where speech itself was a rare commodity, the only sounds were the soft crackle of a fire in the hearth and the distant, muffled rumble of carriages on Pall Mall. Mycroft sat behind a vast mahogany desk, a figure of immense stillness. Opposite him, looking small and utterly broken in a large leather armchair, was Professor Alistair Finch. Lady Beatrice Foxglove stood near the window, her silhouette a study in composed gravity against the grey London afternoon. His voice, when it came, was a low murmur that seemed to absorb the room's quiet rather than disturb it. "Professor, we have brought you here not to assign blame, but to ensure you comprehend the full scope of what has transpired," responded Mycroft Holmes. Mycroft slid a sheaf of papers across the polished wood. The crisp rustle of their movement was startlingly loud, revealing correspondence written in a neat, academic hand, filled with equations and theoretical postulations. Professor Finch stared at them as if they were venomous serpents. His own voice was a dry, rasping whisper, the sound of a man hollowed out by shock. But this was theoretical discourse, a meeting of minds. He called himself a Fellow of the Royal Society of Berlin, a scholar, responded Professor Alistair Finch. She turned from the window, her tone gentle yet firm. He was, Professor, a liar, a very clever one, who knew precisely which notes of intellectual vanity to play to compose his tune, remarked Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Holmes, a still figure by the fireplace until now, finally stirred. With a deliberate, almost surgical precision, he plucked a single sheet from the pile and held it up. His features, usually a mask of cold logic, softened into an expression of what I could only describe as clinical pity. "It is all here, Professor. Your pride blinded you. Consider this query from Herr Kraus on the 7th of last month. He asks about the potential for a harmonic resonance cascade in ferrous metals. A fascinating academic question, is it not?" Sherlock Holmes said. Finch could only manage a numb nod, his gaze fixed and wide, as if trying to comprehend a language he had suddenly forgotten. Yet he does not ask about copper or brass or any other conductor, only iron and steel. The question was never about broadcasting power, as you so idealistically imagined. It was always and only about how to shatter the steel nerves of an empire, its telegraph cables, its railway lines, its bridge supports. He was not asking for a key. He was asking you to help him forge a sword. The simple, brutal clarity of my friend's logic struck the professor like a physical blow. A low, wretched sound escaped his lips, and he covered his face with trembling hands. The quiet of the room returned, now heavier than before, thick with the weight of a terrible new knowledge. Mycroft gathered the papers with an air of finality. The device recovered from the clock tower is now in the care of His Majesty's government. Your research, Professor, will be continued under new, more scrupulous supervision. You are dismissed, answered Mycroft Holmes. As if pulled by invisible strings, Finch stumbled to his feet. A discreet attendant appeared at his elbow, guiding the professor from the room like a somnambulist, a man utterly undone by his own genius. Lady Beatrice gave Holmes a look of profound, unspoken concern before taking her own leave, leaving Mycroft, Holmes, and myself alone with the crackling fire. His voice was low, and for the first time I detected a note of true weariness in it. "You have your weapon, Mycroft," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. "We have a deterrent, Sherlock, a necessary one in a world that does not stand still," Mycroft Holmes replied. "You have unleashed a ghost, an invisible form of warfare that will haunt the coming century. We have stopped the man, but you, my brother, have just given his idea a home," stated Sherlock Holmes. Without another word, Holmes turned and strode from the room. I followed him out into the encroaching twilight of Pall Mall, the chill in the air seeming to emanate not from the November fog, but from the cold, hard truth of his final words. The familiar comfort of our Baker Street lodgings seemed for the first time to offer little solace. A steady November rain wept against the window panes, its dreary drumming a mournful accompaniment to the hiss and crackle of the fire in our hearth. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool and Holmes's strongest shag tobacco. Yet an unnerving silence had fallen between us since our return from the Diogenes Club. Holmes had sunk into his favourite armchair, his long, thin fingers steepled before him, his gaze lost in the flickering heart of the flames. The affair was concluded, the immediate threat to the Empire averted, yet there was no triumph in his posture, only a profound and unsettling weariness. At last I could bear the quiet no longer. "Well, Holmes, a grim business, but a successful one. Mycroft will be pleased. Krauss is neutralized, and the device is in safe hands." Dr. John Watson inquired. He did not look at me. For a long moment the only reply was the gentle ticking of the mantel clock, each second marking time in a world that felt irrevocably altered. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, devoid of its usual sharp energy, and layered with a melancholy I had seldom heard. "Safe hands, Watson. Are there any hands that can be called safe when given the power to command lightning from the ether? We have apprehended a single ambitious agent, yes. We have confiscated a single ingenious machine. But what have we truly stopped?" He shifted then, leaning forward until the firelight cast his sharp features into a mask of stark shadows and brilliant highlights. His grey eyes seemed to hold a reflection of some distant, terrible horizon. "We have caught the man, but we cannot cage the idea. Professor Finch, in his misguided idealism, has uncorked the genie that no bottle will ever hold again. What one man can imagine, another can build. What Krauss attempted for the Kaiser, others will attempt for their own kings and causes, and they will succeed." Sherlock Holmes responded, "But surely our own government will use such knowledge only to defend, to maintain the peace," I ventured, though the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Dr. John Watson added. A dry, mirthless sound, barely a breath, escaped him. "Defense is merely the prelude to offense. Watson, tonight we have stood upon a precipice and looked down into the future of human conflict. It is a future of warfare fought not by brave men on a battlefield, but by technicians in laboratories, miles from the devastation they unleash. An unseen arsenal striking from an empty sky. Imagine it. No sound, no warning, only a silent, incandescent flash, and a telegraph station, a bridge, a ship, simply ceases to be. How can courage stand against a foe you cannot see? How can honor survive a war in which the warrior is utterly disconnected from his dreadful work? He rose and paced before the fire, his tall frame a restless silhouette against the glow. The distant clatter of a hansom cab's wheels on the wet cobblestones below seemed an echo from a simpler, more tangible age. This is the legacy of Fincher's work, a terrible new efficiency in the business of destruction. The world has grown smaller, Watson, yet the shadows have grown longer. I fear we have done little more than hand our own empire the blueprint for a darker age, observed Sherlock Holmes. He fell silent, turning to stare out of the rain-streaked window at the blurred gaslights of Baker Street. I had no answer for him. In his grim pronouncement, I heard not the triumphant solution to a puzzle, but a mournful prophecy. The case was closed, but the consequences, I felt with a sudden chilling certainty, were only just beginning to unfold upon an unsuspecting world.